Hello, I'm Katie Jeffries here with First Coast News Plus. I lead our Unsolved series here at First Coast News, which features local cold cases around the First Coast as well as into the Suwannee Valley region, which is why today we are going to be speaking with the director of Suwannee Valley Unsolved. We have Jason Futch here with us. Thank you so much, Jason, for joining us. We appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on here, Katie.
So first, let's talk about Suwannee Valley Unsolved. What is it? How did you guys get it started?
Well, I like to joke with people and say that this really was not supposed to happen, this organization, because originally I had been a podcaster for many years in the Pacific Northwest. And during that time, I was, covering cold cases on my podcast, unidentified persons, missing persons, throughout the United States. And so when I moved back to Florida in 2020, it was around the time of the pandemic, I started researching cold cases in our specific region in Columbia County because I lived in Lake City. So what happened was I started working toward a podcast that was going to focus on 3 unsolved homicide cases. One of those cases was Mark Brotherton, who you've covered in the past, as well as Darlene Messer and Linda Rollerson. You've covered all 3 of those, actually. And so I started working. I started collecting information from each case. And ultimately, I started developing a keen interest in unsolved cases in the area. So that's when I was introduced to Project Cold Case. And I went on their database and I was looking for cases in our area. And that's when I came across an unsolved homicide case from Suwannee County that happened in 1983. It was a John Doe case. And according to the case information, there was a guy who was located deceased in the Suwannee River who had been severely decomposed. And they had identified him as a white male in his mid-20s or so, late teens to mid-20s. And he had been bound by rope, shot 9 times with a rifle, and thrown into the Suwannee River with sandbags wrapped around his neck. And over the years, information had continued to trickle in on that case, but very slowly. Then we found out through later on that the case was reopened in 2010, and fingerprints ended up identifying the victim as 19-year-old
Reginald Ward, I believe. Yeah.
Sorry, my mind went blank there for a second. But he was identified in 2011. However, when we had inquired about this case, we were still under the impression that he had still been listed as a John Doe. So we reached out to the Suwannee County Sheriff's Office, or rather I did, and I had sent the Sheriff's Office newspaper clippings about the case. And that's when I was introduced to Wayne Kelly, who sits on our board of directors right now. He was actually our previous chairman on the board. And we spoke about this case. And he said he would look into it, never heard about it. He was fascinated about the history of Suwannee County's past. So he looked into it, found a file that had been just strewn all over the place in the folder, and he had a little bit of a hard time trying to reconstruct everything and putting everything in order. However, by the time he did that, he located that Reginald had been identified, his family had been notified, and the case had actually been at a dead end because when the case was reopened in 2010, it was an effort for for the suspect's son to bargain a plea deal with the federal government because he had knowledge of a homicide in Suwannee County. However, by the time they identified him, he stopped cooperating with investigators, and that's just where it was left at. And then ultimately in 2021, the suspect's son actually passed away, so he could not provide further information when the case was reopened. So fast forward a little bit more. Once we had brought the case to the Sheriff's Office's attention, they chose to reopen the investigation and take the case over from there. At that point, Kelly was able to find out that the suspect's granddaughter had a violation of probation warrant out for her arrest. And that's how they were able to take advantage of the opportunity to sit down with her and say, hey, look, we know that you can get in serious trouble for violating your probation because you have this bench warrant out for your arrest right now. So what we can do is we can work with you and we can try to make this easier on yourself if you can help us with a cold case from 1983 and if you have any knowledge of it. Because we know your father was in prison. He tried to strike a plea deal with them and he just stopped cooperating. So we want to see if you can help us put the puzzle pieces back together on that. And that is when she basically unraveled everything, all the answers that the sheriff's office needed, and talked about how it was a dark stain in the family's history that her grandfather had brutally murdered a black man because of the fact that he was hitchhiking. He had stole some items from a relative's home, the relative of the suspect's home in Dowling Park, and he walked into the suspect's bar he owned in, I believe it was in Madison County, and saw this black man because he was also a racist man. So instead of calling the sheriff's office that he had stolen items, he chose to take justice into his own hands the wrong way and use his prejudice to murder this young man and do to him the way he was done and throw him in the river. So we were able to help the Suwannee County Sheriff's Office successfully close this case. And I will tell you this, literally a day before we were set to release that press release, we had gotten in contact with Reginald's brother who lives in Titusville. And it was just so ironic because they had actually started looking into Reggie's case a little bit more. And when I saw his post, and then he sent me a message on one of the forum boards, he he'd said to give him a call because he really needed to talk to somebody. And we spoke, and I told him, hey, tomorrow we're releasing all the information about your brother's case. And I asked him if anyone had reached out to him. He said no one's spoken to him in over a decade about the case. So I was able to give him that heads up and let him know that this is happening. The sheriff's office located the guy who killed your brother, and then the next day it just blew out, and the news started happening. The news came out, and that's basically when the community got their first look into what Suwannee Valley Unsolved can do for families affected by an unsolved homicide or missing persons case.
And so you all created this, I believe, in July of 2023. It officially became an organization. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? Yeah. To help make sure that these cases are getting the attention they deserve. Families are hopefully able to get some answers. You also had a newspaper initiative and the Echoes to Advocacy campaign. Can you tell me about some of those?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, we had decided not to continue with the podcast after we started gaining some traction. And after a while, it was just like, we need to go ahead and start working on a initiative that will highlight our unsolved cases throughout the North Florida area. And that's when we officially incorporated Suwannee Valley Unsolved in 2023. And that's when we started connecting with family members who had not heard from law enforcement in decades. And that's when we were able to start really educating the community in North Florida about unsolved homicide cases, some going back decades, some going back only a few years ago, and some going back just last year. And it's an opportunity for the community to know that these cases are still open, that everything is happening, and we're just ready to go. And yeah, so we kind of started off with a newspaper initiative, and you covered a story on that a while back, and we talked about how we were basically piecing the puzzles together on these cold cases by getting more information, because a lot of agencies, especially like the Lake City Police Department, are very strict about releasing any details about unsolved cases, releasing reports on unsolved cases. So that's when we were just like, it's time to go dig into the newspaper archives and see what was covered on this case. So what we did is we initiated a few people who lived in the area and some who lived outside of the area. And we were basically working with unsolved homicide dates that we had knowledge of. And we started immediately looking into those cases. And then from that point, we were starting to look from the beginning as to if whether or not there might be more unsolved homicide cases. So any cases that we located in the newspaper that we could not find a resolution on, we would reach out to the respective agency and see if there was any follow-up done on it, if the case was solved, if the case was still unsolved. And in some cases, we actually did have an opportunity to discover more cold cases, like in the Leroy Mills case, where we discovered that he had been missing since 1988. Around the same time, Deidre McGuire went missing, and two women from Lake City were murdered. And this was really a tough time for the area in that regard. And we discovered later, as we were digging in the newspaper, just how thorough the search for Mr. Mills was. Like, they were on horseback going through the woods. They were looking through dumpsters. They were looking in neighborhoods, swamps, just looking for this man. The man was 72 when he went missing. He'd be 109 years old today. We kept looking to see if there was a resolution, and there was no resolution, but there was a person of interest named in the case who would later end up killing two individuals in Lake City. And then for a while, he was actually the oldest man on death row for those two murders. And ultimately, his death row was reversed, and he was sent to Charlotte Correctional in Punta Gorda when he died. So that case remains open by the Lake City Police Department, but it has been closed by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. We're waiting for more information from Florida Department of Law Enforcement in that regard, so we can learn more about the case and why FDLE chose to close it in 2004. So the newspaper initiative was amazing. I think it was really awesome, and I'm glad that we had the volunteers to do it. But as of right now, we've put the project on hold to focus on more initiatives that we're working on. But I do recall them once in a while so we can look through the papers to locate any more information that we may need in some of these cold cases.
And the Echoes to Advocacy initiative, that has been something that was started up earlier this year. You have been able to get together to kind of be a voice for families, to help be advocates on behalf of the family members, the survivors of these cold cases. And I know that this is still kind of very much just getting off the ground, but quickly tell me about Echoes to Advocacy.
Yeah, so the Echoes to Advocacy mission began on June 19th. It's an opportunity for our survivor advocate, Missy Norris, who just joined our program last year, to learn more about the ways we can effectively reach families who have been affected by an unsolved homicide or missing persons case, how we can assist them, how we can refer them to other organizations, and overall, how can we help them publicize their loved one's case and get information out there that would be beneficial for them? And so what we've been doing since June of last year is sitting together and putting together policy and procedures, best practices, interviewing survivors and mental health professionals and law enforcement professionals who can provide information about how we can better serve survivors in our area. And it's been very beneficial. We've got information. We're actually working on the first draft of our policy and procedures right now. And some of it's kind of borrowed from other police departments and sheriff's offices, but we're also putting our own twist to it because cold case advocacy is very unique. And in fact, I was just talking to Ryan Backman last week when I was in crisis training up in Jacksonville, and it's just me and him in regards to nonprofit organizations that are focusing heavily on unsolved cases in Florida. It's just me and him, so we have to be very unique in that regard to better understand what the needs of the survivors are in our area, especially in rural Florida.
And break down how many cases there are and why specifically Suwannee Valley is such a challenge. I know that, in the cases I've covered out there, a lot of the departments just don't have the resources that larger police departments, say Jacksonville, do. So they just don't have the resources to be able to do all of the forensic testing, things like that are needed for these cold cases.
Right, and I like to joke too and pick on Suwannee County a little bit. I like to say that Suwannee County Sheriff's Office does not have the budget of the Broward County Sheriff's Office because the thing is that in Suwannee County you have 12 unsolved cases, and that's spread out between the Live Oak Police Department and the Suwannee County Sheriff's Office, and the funding for doing third-party testing in labs and stuff like that is going to cost a lot of money. And the thing is that third-party laboratories are in demand now because of the backlogs that are being experienced at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. So the thing is that they have to budget in this money so they can use that. And that's why I've requested the sheriff's offices in some of these jurisdictions to budget for private labs and private testing, like with DNA Labs International, who we have a really great relationship with. And they have all kinds of things that they can utilize that maybe the Florida Department of Law Enforcement does not necessarily have. So that's why, when you combine the cold cases in our area, in our region, we have 80 unsolved homicide, missing persons, unidentified decedents, and death investigation cases. That is less than 1% of the total count in the state of Florida, and that count is well over 20,000 unsolved cases in Florida. Now, when people come up to me and say, well, that's not really that many, I mean, why should agencies focus on cold cases if it's not that many? Because less than 1%, just even one homicide is just too many, especially in rural Florida where this is supposed to be America's backyard. You know what I mean? And so that's why we're highlighting these cases. And I know it can be an uncomfortable subject at times, but the thing is that people need to be educated on unsolved crimes, because maybe someone out there might have information and they may be willing to come forward even now in certain cases that go back many years, because the suspect may have died, witnesses may have died, or the fear for their life may no longer exist and they want to come forward. So that's something that we've been really wanting to push out there. And that's where our education comes into play. Educating the community on unsolved homicide cases, because they might want to come forward if they have information on that.
We have about 10 minutes left here, so I do want to walk through some of the cases. So first, let's talk about Angela Maxwell. This is a case out of Lake City in August of 1992. Just a tragic case. A young mother, she had two little kids, an 11-month-old and a 3-week-old baby are found alive with her. She's found dead in the apartment. The 3-week-old baby found on her chest, miraculously alive. But this young mother just viciously beaten to death, and this case still remains open.
Yeah, in fact, this was another success of the newspaper project. We located Angela Maxwell's case. I interviewed a couple of people that knew her. In fact, I met a radio disc jockey who worked back at 94.3 back in the day, and he had actually put up reward money for her case because no one else was doing it. So because she had 3 kids, and that was just such a tragic situation, really tragic, and that's why we wanted to start doing more in this case. So I reached out to the Lake City Police Department, and they confirmed that the case was still open. And from there, it just kind of blossomed into getting more information out. I met the investigator in this case. His name is Richard Poteet. Really good dude. I think that they've got some things going on right now. I don't have specifics, but I do know that this case is active and ongoing. Things are moving in the right direction since we brought it back to the forefront. But what's more is I had an opportunity to meet Kenyatta Maxwell Blake, who is the sister of of Angela Maxwell, and we began a friendship. And she's actually on our Advocacy committee as a survivor with lived experience, because she wants to share her story to the community and have an opportunity for people to know Angela's story. And she's been helping us with the policy and procedures for our organization as well. So it's been an amazing relationship. But most importantly, we've been highlighting Angela's case. In fact, this morning on our Facebook page, if you go on there, we just did a small story on her that our survivor advocate put together, and have an opportunity to learn more about her case. So I definitely encourage people to look more into Angela's, because this case is, again, very active. It's still ongoing, and I'm really hoping for the best result here on her case.
Another case, Linda Rollerson. Now, this one, when we covered it, I was very surprised that they had images of the man who shot and killed Linda Rollerson, along with his voice on the security cam footage telling her to give him the money. She was murdered July 2008 at the Joy American food store there in Lake City, killed in it looks like a holdup. And just her family, she has several young grandchildren who we spoke to who are devastated. On the screen here, you can see the vehicle that the man was in, and you'll see him come in here in just a second. But even though they have this video and the man's voice, it still remains unsolved.
Yeah, this is such a tragic case, because, I mean, Linda Rollerson, Miss Rollerson, was close to retirement. She was working two jobs. She worked at Joy America and also worked at the U.S. Cold Storage as a full-time job. And she had a really big community around her that loved her and supported her. But most importantly, she had a family that loved her, her grandkids, her children, her husband. I mean, to think that you get a phone call late in the evening that, your wife or your mother has been killed in a robbery like this is just such a tragic situation. And over the years, I've had an opportunity to get to know her son, Rusty, and he talked about some of the personal issues he's had in his life since then, and really personal. And I'm not going to repeat that for his respect, but every time I look at the video and then listen to the audio and listen to it in its entirety, it's such a tragic, tragic situation that should have never happened. And at least we have the images of this guy. Maybe somewhere in the future, there might be an opportunity to clear those photos up even better, and also get some good analysis of his voice. And it's just tragic that it's still cold, that nothing has happened since the case was opened up. And I only wish that that the family had answers in her case, and it's something that we really want to also put out there. And thank you for actually putting her case out there and getting the story too. So, again, such a tragic case, and I wish it never happened, but I also wish none of these cases ever happened too.
And one last case to feature here, Pamela Gamble's August of 1988. It's not one we've covered in Unsolved yet. I was reading up on it this morning, but a sad situation, but it seems like there might be, or there might have been, a suspect in this case. Just real quick, tell us about that.
Yeah, so in that case, it is really an interesting situation where you had her body found on the side of Tustanoogie Road, 121 in Lake City. She was wrapped with a green blanket and visqueen plastic around her. And for years, we've been wanting to definitely put more information out there. But recently, we were able to get a public records request on her case. And we discovered that there has been persons of interest identified in this case. One of them was actually a man who was charged with murder in Polk County. And he was a registered sex predator who lived in Lake City and who worked on the farms, same as she did. And his name has come up in the investigation, as well as another case that's cold in Madison County that we've been covering too. Valerie, her case. And so we've been working on that, trying to get the lead to follow up. We don't have information on what happened with that lead, but we do know that she was last seen with a female individual in Union County the night before her murder. And so she's been identified as a person of interest, and we're hoping that law enforcement will continue to follow up on her lead and try to get that moving in the right direction.
If people want to get involved with Suwannee Valley Unsolved, how can they volunteer? How can they help with all of this?
Well, I mean, we have a website now, SuwanneeValleyUnsolved.org. We do have an opportunity for people to apply. It's still paper applications right now, but we will accept them through email. Info@SuwanneeValleyUnsolved.org. They can apply to be a volunteer. We've also got three chair positions open on the board of directors. We're looking for people who are willing to get their hands dirty, opportunity to help us raise funds for this organization, because we are going to be using these funds to help us progress in our organization further. So stuff like that. So we definitely need volunteers who can also help us with public events too. As you guys are seeing on the screen there, like we've got like public events such as like the All Aboard Festival we just did in Live Oak. We have the Wildflower Festival coming up in May. We've also got some public events in Branford. We're having a cold case roundtable that's going to feature now Sergeant Chris Frost of the Suwannee County Sheriff's Office and Todd Hand, who's a cold case investigator with Alachua County. They're going to be answering questions from the public, from the audience. You can email your questions, and they'll be able to answer those. And we've also got a chicken and rice fundraiser at the end of this week on Friday. $10 a plate, hearty helping of chicken and rice and green beans. So far, we've raised $1,200, and we're hoping to raise more for that. The Suwannee County Sheriff's Office has been very wonderful in helping us with that fundraiser. So we're really excited about the future and the ways we can effectively help family members in the Suwannee River Valley, especially now we're entering Baker County too, which is just right outside the valley, but not too far to where we can't help them. So we just established an agreement, and we will be drafting an MOU soon, so we can effectively help Baker County and their area.
That's awesome. And one of the biggest events you guys have, we had the Hope and Justice Dinner, I believe November 8th of this year. If people want to kind of mark their calendars, keep an eye out for that. And I believe Aphrodite Jones will be there once again, of course, very well known within the crime and true crime kind of field. But it's dinner. It's a chance for families to meet with several investigators who came and showed support. But the Hope and Justice Dinner, kind of like your big event each year to raise money.
Yeah, and that was such an eye-opening experience. I mean, to have an opportunity to have one of the most renowned crime writers to come to your event in little old Live Oak, I mean, that was awesome. But also, she got to sit down with our families and hear their side of the story on these cases. And to watch that unfold, it was just beautiful, because some of these families had not been able to talk this way in many years. No one had an opportunity to sit down and say, you know, this is how I feel and I want something done. And they had that opportunity to do that at the dinner. And so that's where we're kind of getting the basis for some of the programs that we're going to be doing in the future for families. But also this year, we're changing things up. We're kind of limiting our guest speakers, but also we're having an opportunity to let families come up to the microphone, share their stories to the public, because they want to be heard. And it would be good if other community leaders and members have an opportunity to hear that. The sheriffs that attended too. We had three sheriffs there. We had Sam St. John, the sheriff of Suwannee, Brian Lamb of Lafayette, and we also had Sheriff-elect Wally Kitchens from Columbia County show up. He's now the sheriff, and been doing wonderful work in Columbia with the cold cases. So it was an opportunity, and we raised about $3,000 total at that event, and that's been helping us get our victim services practitioner designation training. That's been helping us get more information out there, like flyers, brochures, and most importantly, it's allowing us to start creating programs that families in our area can take advantage of, especially now that we're growing. It is an opportunity to start broaching the subject on cold cases and start showing that these families really exist, that they still want answers regardless of the amount of time that has passed. I mean, we have families 40 plus years that still want answers in their loved one's case. And it's very important that it is delivered. And most importantly, it is very important that someone's listening to them. And that's why we're here. So that way families can have their voices heard. And the Hope and Justice Dinner is just one of those many caveats that we have that gives those families the opportunity, and it gets their strength back in regards to, it gives them more power in the cold cases. So we're looking forward to it. It's going to be at the Boys Ranch once again in Live Oak on Cecil Webb Place. Be November 8th, and Aphrodite Jones is returning as our keynote speaker. So looking forward to it, and also you're going to be hosting it too. So
I will. I'll be your MC.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Well, Jason Futch, Suwannee Valley Unsolved, I really appreciate your time. For those that want to learn more about it, like Jason said, the address, if you want to go check it out, SuwanneeValleyUnsolved.org to learn more about the organization. But Jason, again, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Katie. Always a pleasure.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us for this presentation on First Coast News Plus. We hope you have a great day.